Buenos días.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please rise. Entering the courtroom are the President of the Court, Judge Nancy Hernandez Lopez, and the Deputy Registrar of the Court, Gabriela Pacheco Arias. Thus, we proceed with the notification ceremony of Advisory Opinion 31 of 2025 concerning the content and scope of the right to care and its interrelationship with other rights. The Inter-American Court of Human Rights welcomes the distinguished members of the Diplomatic Corps who are with us today. We also extend a warm welcome to Ms. Gerleni Leon Marchena, the Minister of Human Development and Social Inclusion of the Republic of Costa Rica. We also welcome Ms. Cecilia Alemani, Deputy Regional Director of UN Women for the Americas and the Caribbean. To Ms. Angela Russo, the Magistrate of the Civil Supreme Court of Justice of Panama, public officials, among them from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Worship of the Republic of Costa Rica, representatives from international organizations, civil society organizations, academic institutions, and to all those who are following us via the court's official social media channels. Up next, the Deputy Registrar of the Inter-American Court will provide some information regarding the present advisory opinion. Good morning. On January 20th of 2023, the Republic of Argentina submitted a request for an advisory opinion on the content and scope of the right to care and its interrelation with other rights, pursuant to Article 64(1) of the American Convention, and also in accordance with Articles 71 and 72 of the Court's Rules of Procedure. The Secretariat of the Court transmitted the request to the member states of the OAS and to other relevant bodies of the organization. In addition, individuals and organizations were invited to submit written observations by a deadline that was extended to November 7th of 2023. We also invited the courts of the region to forward to the court their pertinent jurisprudence on this topic, with the purpose of strengthening judicial dialogue among courts. 129 briefs from 267 different actors were received, including states, OAS bodies, United Nations agencies, state entities, non-governmental organizations, academic institutions, and individuals or groups from civil society. Likewise, the Inter-American Court received jurisprudence from 7 national high courts from states throughout the region. Once the written procedure was concluded, the President of the Court convened a public hearing, which took place on March 12, 13, and 14 of 2024 at the Court's headquarters in San Jose, Costa Rica. At said hearing, 67 delegations appeared before the Court. I would like to highlight that this is the second most widely participated advisory opinion in the history of this court. For this process, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, they issued, and it was composed by Judge Nancy Hernandez Lopez, President, Judge Rodrigo Mondrovich, Vice President, Judges Eduardo Ferrer Magregor Poisot and Ricardo Perez Manrique, and Judges Veronica Gomez and Patricia Perez Goldberg. The Court deliberated on the present advisory opinion during its sessions held in April, May, and June of 2025, and implemented it on July 12 past. We now invite you to watch a brief video on the advisory opinion process, after which the President of the Court will refer to the content of this decision. Thank you very much.
El 20 de enero de 2023, la República de Argentina presentó una solicitud de opinión consultiva ante la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos para que el tribunal se pronunciara sobre el contenido y el alcance del derecho al cuidado y su interrelación con otros derechos. Esta solicitud abordó explícitamente las cuestiones del derecho humano a cuidar, a ser cuidado y al autocuidado, así como la igualdad y no discriminación en materia de cuidados. Asimismo, los cuidados y su vínculo con el derecho a la vida, la familia y los derechos económicos, sociales, culturales y ambientales. Además, incluyó referencia a las obligaciones que tienen los estados en esta materia. Para entender y dimensionar el contexto social e histórico, así como los impactos en las labores de cuidado sobre ciertos sectores de la sociedad mencionados en la solicitud, la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos inició este proceso consultivo que recibió un total de 129 observaciones escritas, provenientes de más de 265 actores de América Latina y el Caribe principalmente, pero también de otros lugares en Europa y África. Este ha sido el segundo proceso más participativo en la historia de la Corte y el primero en el que un tribunal internacional es consultado para abordar el derecho al cuidado. Como parte del proceso, la Corte convocó a una audiencia pública que se celebró los días 12, 13 y 14 de marzo de 2024 en su sede, San José de Costa Rica. En las intervenciones orales participaron cerca de 70 delegaciones representando a estados, órganos internacionales, organismos estatales, organizaciones no gubernamentales, representantes de la academia y otros sectores de la sociedad civil. Durante las audiencias se escucharon voces con múltiples propuestas para analizar las cuestiones relacionadas a las labores de cuidado desde una perspectiva de género, interseccional e intercultural. Distintas personas de diferentes edades y nacionalidades resaltaron cómo condiciones como la edad, la discapacidad, la orientación sexual, la situación socioeconómica y la migración pueden impactar el acceso a los cuidados. Después de un largo proceso, hoy la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos presenta la opinión consultiva 31 de 2025 sobre el derecho al cuidado y su interrelación con otros derechos.
Good morning. Thank you all very much for being here this morning in this notification ceremony. Up next, I will outline some of the main elements of Advisory Opinion number 31 of 2025 on the content and the scope of the right to care and its interrelation with other rights. Since this is an extensive advisory opinion, I will be highlighting the 9 key points. First, the court declared that it has jurisdiction to issue an opinion on the request in accordance with the American Convention and its rules of procedures. And it answered the 3 questions that were presented by the state of Argentina. Secondly, the court also highlighted that the interpretation and advisory opinion must be considered by all the states that are parts of the Organization of American States. This due to the fact that the provisions of the American Convention and the San Salvador Protocol are linked with other binding instruments from all the members of the Organization of American States. In particular, the Charter of the organization, the American Declaration on the Rights of Man. And thirdly, the court referred to care in international law and constitutional law throughout the region, and on this point, the court acknowledged that the right to care constitutes a basic need that is universal. The court concluded that the international law of human rights and comparative constitutional law acknowledge the laws and obligations to preserve the well-being of persons through particular care, especially in situations where they are dependent, are vulnerable, or are in need. The court points out that this protection is expressed, 1, in care that are required by certain groups, such as pregnant women or women who are breastfeeding, children, the elderly, disabled people, people with illnesses. Two, as well as in the situation of people who provide care, whether it's paid or unpaid. The analysis of pertinent international instruments by specialized organizations allowed the court that caring for people is necessary to protect other human rights. And it also allowed to notice that other international instruments recognize the need to adopt specific measures aimed at achieving a more equitable distribution of care and at establishing public support systems that recognize, value, and redistribute caregiving tasks. Fourth, on the scope and content of the right to care, the court addressed that this is an autonomous right protected by the American Convention, and in this regard, the court noted that care has been recognized as an essential component of multiple rights protected by the American Convention and plays an instrumental role in their full realization. The court also held that its fragmented treatment of care, limited to partial dimensions within other rights, is insufficient. This partial approach fails to adequately address the many ways in which the absence of care can affect human dignity, and it does not provide appropriate guarantees for those who perform caregiving work. Consequently, and based on a systematic, evolutionary, and pro persona interpretation of the rights enshrined in the Convention, the court concluded unanimously that there's an autonomous right to care exists, derived from the joint reading of Articles 4, 5, 7, 11, 17, 19, 24, 26, and 1.1 of the American Convention. The court held that it is therefore incumbent upon states to respect and guarantee this right, as well as to adopt legislative and other measures to ensure its full effectiveness, pursuant to Articles 1.1 and 2 of the same instrument. Moreover, the court noted that the right to care also derives from rights recognized in the American Declaration, particularly in Articles 1, 2, 6th, 11th, 14th, through the 16th, as well as from Articles 34 and 45 of the Charter of Organization of American States. Accordingly, the court considered that the autonomous right to care encompasses every person's right to have the time, space, and resources necessary to provide, receive, or secure conditions that ensure their comprehensive well-being and enable them to freely pursue their life plans in accordance with their abilities and their stage of life. In this logic, the court emphasized that the purpose of care is not only the subsistence of both caregivers and care recipients, but also the fulfillment and realization of their life projects, thereby reinforcing personal autonomy and inclusion within the community. The court analyzed the content of right to care from three basic aspects: the right to be cared for, and the right to care for others, and the right to self-care. With regards to be cared for, the court only referred to individuals that provide a certain level of care. And the right to be cared for entails that any person that has some degree of dependency have the right to receive care that is adequate, sufficient to carry out a life in dignity. This care must ensure their physical, spiritual, mental, and cultural well-being. The court also indicated that the scope and characteristics of care The court also indicated that the scope and characteristics of care must be tailored to the individual's stage of life, their level of dependency, and their particular needs. The right to care for others consists in the right to provide care under dignified conditions, whether this is in a paid or an unpaid capacity. This right implies that caregivers, whether within the family or in any other setting, must be able to carry out their work without discrimination and with full respect for their human rights, ensuring their physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and cultural well-being. Finally, the right to self-care includes the right of both caregivers and care recipients to pursue their own well-being and address their physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and cultural needs. This dimension acknowledges the importance of individuals having the time, space, and resources to care for themselves, to exercise their autonomy, and to live a life of dignity. Fifth, now, with regards to principles, the court unanimously determined that the right to care is grounded in and shaped by the principles of shared responsibility, solidarity, and equality and non-discrimination. Regarding the principle of social and familial shared responsibility, the court held that care is a shared responsibility among individuals, families, communities, society, businesses, and the states. The court affirmed that this principle imposes a subsidiary obligation on various social actors to ensure the management and sustainability of daily life activities. Within the family context, it entails an equitable and supportive distribution of unpaid care work between men and women. Now, as for the principle of solidarity, the court stated that it is based on the idea of a shared humanity, from which arises a duty of mutual respect and cooperation among individuals to enjoy their rights and also to pursue common goals. Likewise, it recognized that care requires mutual support among the different members and actors of society, which means providing support to those who carry out caregiving tasks so that their work is acknowledged, valued, and sustained through measures that ease the physical, emotional, and the economic burdens involved. Now, with respect to the principle of equality and non-discrimination, the court found that there is a clear mandate to avoid inequality in the performance of caregiving tasks, particularly between men and women. In addition, the court also found that states have the obligation to refrain from acts that violate the right to care, organize the state apparatus in such a way that it is capable of ensuring the legal protection and full exercise of this right, and to adopt or repeal domestic legal provisions necessary to guarantee the effectiveness and scope of the right to care, which also must include, at a minimum, the enhancement protection for groups that are in vulnerable situations. Also, mechanisms to protect those who carry out caregiving work, recognizing their social contribution and ensuring dignified conditions for the performance of such tasks, and the recognition of everyone's right to care for others and to receive care. The court also noted that it is the responsibility of states to design public policies that are aimed at the progressive implementation of the right to care. Now, the court also emphasized the importance of national care systems as structural instruments for guaranteeing the right to care, because they allow for the regulation, coordination, the oversight, and supervision of different modes of care service provision. The court stated that such systems can serve as tools to expand care service options and coverage, with the aim of ensuring compliance with the minimum elements of the right to care. Sixth, with regards to the right to care, equality, and non-discrimination, the court determined that states must ensure that caregiving tasks are carried out without discrimination. And in this regard, it recalled that the American Convention contains a mandate to protect the family. understood in its broadest sense, which includes the state's obligation to guarantee equal rights and a fair allocation of responsibilities. Now, the court found that due to negative gender stereotypes and also due to sociocultural behavior patterns, unpaid care work falls disproportionately on women and girls, to the point that they carry out unpaid care tasks at a rate 3 times higher than men. This situation is further exacerbated when intersecting with other factors of discrimination. The court noted that despite progress in women's access to public services and the labor market, unpaid care work continues to be inequitably distributed within families. These negative stereotypes hinder men from participating in caregiving activities for their children and other family members. Furthermore, the court also observed that caregiving burdens are both invisible and undervalued, despite the fact that in at least 10 countries in the region, their contribution has been estimated at between 15.9% and 27.6% of the GDP. For these reasons, the court unanimously held that, without prejudice to individuals' right to freedom and autonomy within the family, states are obligated to progressively implement public policies that are aimed at reversing caregiving related stereotypes and sociocultural patterns to ensure that they are provided without discrimination. These public policies must include, or may include, educational reforms, measures to promote equitable parental caregiving, flexible work policies for employees with family caregiving responsibilities, investment in high-quality care systems, services, policies, and infrastructure, strengthening community initiatives aimed at providing care. And in addition, the court also unanimously held that the inequitable distribution of unpaid caregiving work constitutes an obstacle to women's and girls' enjoyment of rights on an equal footing, particularly the rights to work, social security, education, and self-care. Consequently, the court stated that states must adopt measures that support the entry or reintegration of unpaid caregivers into the formal labor force, when they so wish, including work arrangements compatible with caregiving responsibilities. They must also review restrictions on access to Social Security to ensure that they do not discriminate against women, either in law or in practice. They must adopt measures to reverse the root causes of the inequitable and disproportionate assignment of unpaid care work to women using an intersectional approach. They must implement or continue implementing statistical systems to measure, value, and quantify unpaid care work and its contribution to the economy. The court also found that certain groups that are performing unpaid care work are in situations of particular vulnerability. We're speaking of women who are head single-parent households and are responsible for both household income and also for caregiving duties for their children and other members of their family. Women caregivers who are related to the penal system, women who searching for missing persons, migrant women, indigenous and Afro-descendant women, older women caregivers, and women with disabilities or women who care for persons with disabilities. In these cases, the court held that states are obligated to adopt measures, some progressive, to ensure the exercise of the right to care without discrimination. Finally, in this regard, the court held that under the principle of shared responsibility, states must adopt provisions that are aimed at strengthening community caregiving networks, as well as national and local care systems and infrastructure. This includes services for those who do not have family or community networks, as well as mechanisms designed to ensure the provision of care beyond the family context alone. Now, seventh is the right to be cared for, equality and non-discrimination. In relation to the right to be cared for, the court recalled that all individuals, at different moments in our lives, we require care or support to varying degrees. This may arise due to factors such as age, the presence of a serious, chronic, or disabling illness, or a condition that is affecting independence or having a disability. In such circumstances, the right to be cared for may be affected by negative stereotypes and prejudices. For this reason, the court addressed the state's obligations to guarantee the exercise of the right to be cared for under conditions of equality for individuals belonging to these groups. Regarding the right of children and adolescents to receive care, the right to receive care, the court unanimously held that, pursuant to the principle of shared responsibility, both society and the state must act jointly to ensure the special and reinforced protection of children and adolescents, particularly those whose families are unable to provide adequate care services. This includes strengthening community-based care initiatives, creating state-run care facilities, creating social programs that allow for in-home care of children under state supervision, and also promoting private initiatives aimed at childcare. Additionally, the court also held that whenever the care or responsibility of a child is assumed by the state, whether this is through any kind of institutionalization or alternative care arrangements, such measures must be guided by the principles of necessity, exceptionality, and temporariness, particularly with respect to the separation of a child from their family. The state is also responsible for the safety, well-being, and development of the child and must periodically review such decisions. With regard to the right of the elderly to receive care, the court held that this group does not constitute a homogeneous category with a presumed need for care. This depends on factors such as social barriers, their health condition, their socioeconomic condition, etc. But the court also noted a change in demographic that is marked by an increasing proportion of elderly persons, which has implications for the right to care. And in this context, the court unanimously held that the right of older persons to be cared for compels states to take measures to guarantee access to services of quality care and for these services to be provided without discrimination when needed, and must also ensure that older persons can exercise their right to self-care. The court emphasized that states must fulfill these obligations within a framework of respect for the rights to autonomy, independence, safety, and a life free from violence. Finally, concerning the right to receive care for persons with disabilities or with serious, chronic, or debilitating illnesses that compromise independence and require caregiving, the court recalled that despite the prohibition of discrimination against persons with disabilities, this population continues to face obstacles in accessing their right to receive care under equal conditions, primarily due to stereotypes grounded in medical or dependency-based models. Therefore, the court unanimously held that guaranteeing the rights to care for this group must be based on their needs for support and not only assistance, understanding that support and assistance and care required by people with disabilities are not homogeneous and must be based on their respect to their rights to autonomy, independence, safety, and a life free from violence. The court also highlighted that states must recognize persons with disabilities as rights holders and not as passive recipients of care. Additionally, the court also found that states must adopt a social model of disability, a model which acknowledges persons with disabilities as autonomous and independent individuals capable of exercising self-care. Eighth, the right to care in relation to the right to work. The court, by majority, held that care work constitutes labor protected under the American Declaration, the Protocol of San Salvador, and the American Convention, insofar as it involves freely chosen service activities provided to others, which have economic and social value and are carried out with a certain degree of continuity and intensity. Likewise, the court also found that paid care work refers to activities that are performed in exchange for economic compensation. Many of these activities take place in daycare centers, schools, medical facilities, elder care centers, or within households. And this can be performed in both professional and non-professional contexts. And in this regard, the court held that paid care workers are entitled to the same rights as any other worker. Given the historical invisibility of this sector, the court found that states must implement special measures to ensure the full exercise of their right to work under fair, equitable, and satisfactory conditions, including promoting written employment contracts, easing access criteria for Social Security, preventing and addressing work-related risks, supervising workspaces, preventing and punishing abuse, harassment, violence, human trafficking, and servitude. On the other hand, the court also noted that unpaid care work refers to caregiving activities performed without economic compensation. These activities typically take place within households, although they may also occur in community settings such as daycare centers or even soup kitchens. Such activities involve managing and sustaining the overall well-being of others and are carried out with a certain degree of permanence and intensity. So with regard to unpaid care work, the court unanimously held that states must adopt measures to eliminate all forms of forced and child labor and eliminate discrimination against persons engaged in unpaid caregiving. They also must progressively guarantee those engaged in unpaid care work minimum protections derived from the right to work, such as limiting daily working time, minimum periods of rest, and access to a social security system that protects them in the event of illness or old age. The court also unanimously held that states must ensure that workers with caregiving responsibilities can exercise their right to work without discrimination. And to that end, they must progressively implement measures to reconcile work life with caregiving needs, both for their dependents and for themselves, and also remove barriers that prevent caregiving duties from hindering access to or retention of employment. The court also affirmed that guarantees for workers with family responsibilities must be exercised without discrimination, which entails adopting the necessary adjustments to extend protection to adoptive mothers and fathers, individuals with non-traditional family ties, such as LGBTIQ plus persons or persons in single-parent families. Ninth, the right to care in relation to the rights to Social Security, health, and education. On this point, the court addressed the interrelation and interdependence of the right to care with the rights to Social Security, health, and education. With respect to the right to Social Security, the court unanimously held that states must implement Social Security systems that are based on the principles of universality, solidarity, social inclusion, and progressivity, incorporating both contributory and non-contributory components. Additionally, the court held that states must progressively guarantee maternity and paternity leave and family benefits that allow persons with caregiving responsibilities to exercise their right to care. The children enjoy the right to be cared for and maintain an adequate standard of living during essential periods for their development, and that mothers are able to care for themselves, particularly during pregnancy and also postpartum period. The court also considered that states must progressively ensure disability, old age, and survivor benefits that guarantee the rights to care and self-care of caregivers and to prevent them from being left unprotected due to aging or disability that prevents them from providing for their own livelihood after a life dedicated to caregiving. For example, through measures to progressively transition from the informal to the formal economy, mechanisms to allow persons engaged in atypical forms of work to access to the contributory system, crediting contribution time for children raised, and recognizing also pension credits for individuals who have dedicated themselves to caregiving work. The court also held that to guarantee the right to care and self-care, states must progressively ensure that measures to ensure that Social Security benefits extend to persons who, due to their age, their health, or their disability condition, are unable to produce the resources necessary for their subsistence and require care due to their level of dependency. The court also determined that all of the above guarantees must be ensured without discrimination, which implies making the necessary adjustments to extend protection to adoptive mothers and fathers, and also persons with non-traditional family ties, such as the ones that I mentioned previously. With regards to the right to health, the court unanimously held that states must acknowledge the central role played by persons that are engaged in paid and also unpaid care work in the realization of their right to health, and must also implement measures to protect their rights, taking into account the risks that are involved in such labor. Now, in relation to the right to be cared for, the court reiterated that states must progressively implement measures to guarantee the quality, availability, and adaptability of health services for persons that have some level of dependency, recognizing that this is a core component of their overall well-being and ensuring respect for their autonomy. Now, with regards to self-care, the court considered that states must ensure progressive access to services that enable all persons to access formal health care, both for the prevention and the treatment of illnesses, and to actively participate in the healthcare process, given its implications for individual well-being. Now, finally, with regard to the right to education, the court unanimously held that states must take progressive actions to prevent the burden of unpaid caregiving tasks from becoming a barrier to access to education, particularly in cases of early motherhood. Now, in relation to the dimension of being cared for, the court affirmed that states must implement measures to ensure the quality of educational systems and their adaptation to the caregiving needs of individuals, taking into account the stage of life, their level of dependency, and characteristics such as ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, or any other relevant factor. Now, regarding self-care, the court held that states must progressively ensure that educational systems contribute to transforming gender stereotypes, promote autonomy and independence of individuals, and provide individuals with tools to care for their own well-being, including those that are derived from traditional, local, and indigenous practices that recognize the relationship between individuals, communities, and the environment. This advisory opinion had a concurrent vote and partially dissenting opinion by Judge Patricia Perez Goldberg, and concurring opinions by President Eduardo Ferrer Magrego Poisot and Judge Veronica Gomez. To conclude, I would like to highlight the diligent and committed work carried out by the court staff. I thank you all very much for your commitment and for your high level of professionalism in providing a timely and rigorous response to the request submitted by the state of Argentina. And finally, just a few final thoughts. We know that all human beings require care to ensure both our existence and our well being at different stages of our life. Undoubtedly, we will depend on the support of others in order to survive, to live with dignity, and to autonomously develop our life projects. The evidence that we have seen and received during the hearing and in the written observations submitted in this process indicate that our region is at the forefront of a global debate on the protection and guarantee of care and the recognition of its economic and social value. In compliance with its mandate, the Court contributes through this decision to strengthening the legal framework surrounding this topic on the shared responsibility and solidarity of states, businesses, families, and individuals to help pave the way for structural transformations that recognize, redistribute, and revalue care as an essential component of the economic and social development of our peoples. Madam Deputy Registrar, please proceed to conclude the notification ceremony. Thank you, Madam President. Thus, I certify that Advisory Opinion number 31 of 2025 has been officially notified. The full text of this decision will be sent to all participants in the consultative process in its official Spanish version and will also be made available on a microsite of the court, which has been designed according to accessibility standards. On that very same site, you will also find the written observations submitted during the consultative process, recordings of the public hearings, the press release, and an official summary on the advisory opinion. English and Portuguese translations of this decision, as well as an accessible reading version, will be published on the same website in the upcoming weeks. Likewise, individual opinions will likewise be published on the same website. Before we conclude this ceremony, the Secretariat apologizes for the technical issues with audio that occurred today, and we thank you once again for participating. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Thank you for being here. Have a great day.